Welcome to Coffee Commerce. My name is Sean Ramett and I'm the grandson of a coffee farmer from Guyana, South America. On Coffee Commerce, we talk about the stories behind coffee as they relate to business, culture, and society. In our last episode, we spoke about coffee coming to America. Although it had a humble start, unlike in Britain, Europe, and the Ottoman Empire, we should not despise small beginnings. Coffee was here to stay and became part of the American culture. Coffee would get a boost and given a boost to the American Civil War. The Civil War was the deadliest and bloodiest conflict in America's history, claiming 622,000 lives between 1861 and 1865. It essentially split the country in two, with the Union Army in the north battling the Confederate Army in the south. The Union North would emerge victorious, and it could be argued that there was a role that coffee played. Once coffee gained a foothold in the American culture, it never looked back. And on the onset of the Civil War in April of 1861, this sparked a spike in American coffee consumption. Coffee was relatively cheap to obtain, didn't spoil easily, and was universally liked by soldiers. It became a staple of the Union soldiers' rations. Both armies were hooked on caffeine. Initially, both armies had access to coffee. The Union Army had greater access to the coffee beans than the Confederate Army. A Union blockade for trade from the South would make coffee and other commodities scarce. It is believed that this was one of the multiple factors at play that gave the North an advantage over the South. Union soldiers were often more alert and energized than their Southern counterparts. Coffee would also become a symbolic representation of comfort and warmth, and a chance to gather around a cup of coffee. In the Union Army, coffee became a staple beverage thanks in part to Andrew Jackson. Although his decision to embrace coffee had more to do with replacing it with alcohol as the staple beverage in favor of coffee. Alcohol would have been more expensive and also would not be seen as a stimulant the way that coffee would be. In his book, Hardtack and Coffee, John D. Billings describes the history of soldiers' lives during the American Civil War. Hardtack was a hard cracker around since the time of the Crusades. This became a staple since it could be eaten as long as 10 years after it was made. The issue was that unless you kept them in ideal preservative conditions, they would get filled with maggots and bugs. To resolve this problem, they would put the hardtack in the hot coffee that would kill the maggots. The maggots would float to the top and the soldiers would simply scoop them out of the coffee, taking the hardtack and eating it with their coffee. This would not only make the coffee more edible and safer to eat, but also added some flavor to a rather bland staple. The annual coffee rations for Union soldiers was 36 pounds each. To put this in perspective, today the average American drinks 9 pounds of coffee per year. Back in the 1800s, the soldier was assigned rations of 4 times this average. At the beginning of the war, America imported over 180 million pounds of coffee per year. Most of this would go to the North. The typical Union soldier would drink coffee when they woke up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and on breaks. Dairy was a luxury, so they would drink coffee black with a pinch of sugar. Sugar was very expensive. They would have a small ration of sugar, so they would use it sparingly. Even when the Union soldiers didn't have time to brew their own coffee, they were known to have chewed on coffee beans. Each soldier had to brew their own coffee. They had to boil the water, coarse grind up their own beans, add it to the boiling water, let it sit for a few minutes before scooping out the beans and enjoying a nice hot cup of coffee. The main issue was having enough time to both make it and enjoy the coffee. The Confederate Army had tried to make coffee part of the ration, but they had some things going against them. The South, too, had an army of coffee lovers, but they had to deal with southern port blockades from the Union Army. This put the import of food and coffee in short supply. As a result, coffee rations were suspended for the Confederate Army. One of the things that can be said about the Southern soldiers is that they were very resourceful and creative when it came to their rations. In the absence of well-supplied food, they became creative cooks with their own meals, and even making their own version of coffee brews. Instead of coffee, the Confederate Army had tried rye coffee. The issue is that rye grew alongside some poisonous plants, so you would have to be careful about selecting rye to make your coffee. It was considered a dangerous option as a replacement for coffee. They also tried acorn coffee. Then they had sweet potato coffee. Some swore by this as the best substitute for coffee given the circumstances. Chicory was also added to different mixtures to give coffee flavor. Even today, chicory is added to some coffee as a filler in some products. It should be noted that although coffee was not part of the Confederate Army's rations, they did have access to it. While they craved coffee, they had access to tobacco, while the North did not. Trading coffee for tobacco was known to have occurred. Coffee was seen as the strategy to keep soldiers alert, moving, and in good spirits. These factors combined to make coffee one of the most popular and widespread beverages beyond the Civil War. With this momentum, and with life slowly returning to normal, coffee's popularity remained high on the backs of the soldiers coming home. The coffee import business was very important as well. It was very key for one country in particular that had fueled the coffee import industry in America during this time. But that's another story for another cup of coffee. Thank you.